His character hates my character because I'm with his wife.
At 72, Pierce Brosnan is finally revealing which actors he hated more than anyone during his legendary career. From the Bond girl who sabotaged entire productions with calculated psychological warfare, to the streaming executives who called his former producers effing idiots while stealing his legacy. From brutal on-set betrayals that destroyed relationships to corporate wars that ended decades-long family control of the world's most valuable franchise, the diplomatic mask has finally cracked, and the truth about Hollywood's most ruthless betrayals is about to be exposed. So let's get into it. The set of Tomorrow Never Dies should have been Pierce Brosnan's moment of triumph. Instead, it became a war zone where he discovered that Hollywood co-stars could be more dangerous than any fictional villain.
Bond. James Bond.
Terry Hatcher arrived carrying baggage that had nothing to do with her character, Paris Carver. Fresh off Superman television success, she was determined to prove she belonged in the big leagues. But her method of establishing dominance nearly destroyed the entire production and created an enemy in Pierce Brosnan that would last decades. Brosnan later revealed he got very upset with her because she kept the entire crew waiting while arriving hours late to set. What he didn't say publicly was far worse. Sources close to the production described screaming matches, deliberate schedule sabotage, and a co-star who seemed determined to make Brosnan's life miserable. The problem started immediately. Hatcher would arrive hours late, keeping the entire crew waiting while she perfected her hair and makeup. But this wasn't typical Hollywood diva behavior. It was calculated psychological warfare designed to establish dominance over her more famous co-star. Hatcher later admitted she had zero satisfaction from playing the role, but what she didn't mention was how she took that dissatisfaction out on everyone around her. Cast and crew members described her as demanding, unprofessional, and openly hostile toward Brosnan's suggestions during scenes. The breaking point came during filming of their intimate scenes. Hatcher would deliberately flub her lines, forcing multiple takes that exhausted Brosnan and frustrated director Roger Spottiswoode. When Brosnan finally confronted her about the delays, she accused him of being difficult and threatened to report his aggressive behavior to the producers. The revelation that Hatcher was pregnant came conveniently after weeks of documented lateness and attitude problems. Crew members noted that the pregnancy announcement seemed timed to deflect criticism of her unprofessional behavior rather than explain it. The real betrayal came during the film's promotion. While Brosnan maintained professional courtesy in interviews, Hatcher began spreading stories about his alleged temperament problems. She positioned herself as the victim of an out-of-control leading man, knowing the media would side with the female co-star over the action hero. One crew member revealed it was pretty common knowledge that they didn't like each other, and apparently Hatcher was rather over-exuberant with a slap during their confrontation scene. The physical contact during their scene wasn't acting. It was Hatcher taking revenge for perceived slights, using the choreography as cover for actual assault. The damage extended beyond the immediate production. Hatcher's whisper campaign about Brosnan's difficult behavior spread throughout Hollywood, creating doubts about his professionalism that would haunt future casting decisions. She had successfully weaponized victimhood against a man who couldn't defend himself without appearing to attack a pregnant woman. Brosnan's retaliation was subtle but devastating. He never worked with Hatcher again, despite multiple opportunities where their casting together made financial sense. In any case, Tomorrow Never Dies wasn't just cursed by Terry Hatcher's sabotage, it was a masterclass in how industry politics and incompetent leadership could destroy even the biggest productions. Pierce Brosnan found himself fighting battles on multiple fronts, discovering that his Bond girl wasn't his only enemy on set. Brosnan later described making Tomorrow Never Dies as being like pulling teeth, but the full extent of the chaos was deliberately hidden from the public. What emerged was a portrait of systematic dysfunction that nearly the franchise and left Brosnan questioning whether he wanted to continue as 007. The script problems began before cameras rolled. 7 different writers were brought in to fix a story that nobody could agree on, including Beverly Hills Cop's Dan Petrie Jr., Nicholas Meyer from Star Trek, and Mrs. Doubtfire's Leslie Dixon. The weekend writing sessions were described as fun by participants, code for complete creative anarchy with no clear vision. One screenwriter admitted they didn't have a script that was ready to shoot on the first day of filming. Brosnan was forced to memorize pages that would be completely rewritten by the next morning. creating an atmosphere of constant uncertainty and creative chaos. The real villain wasn't Elliot Carver. It was the toxic environment created by producers who cared more about release dates than quality. One crew member provided a devastating assessment about not seeing how they would ever finish the production, noting that all the happiness and teamwork, which was the hallmark of Bond, had disappeared completely. Director Roger Spottiswoode was caught in the middle, trying to manage a script that changed daily while dealing with prima donna actors and impossible deadlines. The stress created a domino effect of bad decisions that poisoned every aspect of production. The car chase sequences became a nightmare when local authorities weren't properly notified. Fire brigades showed up mid-shoot, thinking there was an actual emergency. The Hamburg parking garage scenes had to be completely reshot when sound problems made the dialogue unusable. Every day brought new crises that could have been avoided with proper planning. Michelle Yeoh, cast as the Bond girl Wai Lin, was brought in specifically for her martial arts skills, but was then prohibited from doing her own stunts. The decision came from insurance companies terrified of liability, but it neutered the entire reason for her casting. Yeoh's frustration was visible on screen, creating wooden performances in scenes that should have been dynamic. The stunt coordination became another source of conflict. Brosnan was expected to perform increasingly dangerous sequences while dealing with the chaos of daily script rewrites. A motorcycle chase through the streets of Saigon was shot without proper safety protocols, resulting in multiple injuries to stunt performers and creating legal liability that haunted the production for years. Jonathan Pryce, playing villain Elliot Carver, found himself caught between the script chaos and Brosnan's growing frustration. One observer noted that the actors didn't know if they were coming or going. Pryce's carefully crafted character development was constantly undermined by rewrites that changed his motivation daily. The breaking point came during post-production, when editor Michael Arcon discovered that crucial dialogue scenes were unusable due to sound problems. Entire sequences had to be re-recorded using automated dialogue replacement, but the original performances were lost forever. The artificial feel of the final product reflected the artificial chaos of its creation. Brosnan's relationship with the Bond producers reached a new low during this period. Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson were more concerned with meeting their release date than addressing the systemic problems destroying their production. Their attitude toward creative concerns was dismissive and arrogant. One crew member noted that Pierce had remained calm about the whole situation, but that calm was masking a fury that would eventually explode into public criticism of the entire Bond machine. The man who had revitalized the franchise with GoldenEye was being systematically undermined by people who treated him as a replaceable commodity. The final insult came when the film's box office success was used to justify the chaotic production methods. Since Tomorrow Never Dies made money despite its problems, the producers saw no reason to change their approach. They had created a toxic environment, but profits excused all sins. This betrayal by the system itself was worse than any individual actor's sabotage. Brosnan realized he wasn't just fighting co-stars. He was fighting an entire industry that valued money over artistry and treated talent as expendable. The breaking point came in 2005, 2 years after Pierce Brosnan's unceremonious dismissal from the Bond franchise. The diplomatic facade he'd maintained for over a decade finally shattered, revealing a rage that had been building since his first day on set. What emerged was the most devastating critique of the Bond machine ever delivered by one of its former stars. Brosnan declared that Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson played it too safe, describing the pomposity and rigmarole they put directors through as astounding. He was finally naming the real villains who had controlled and ultimately destroyed his career as 007. But that was just the opening salvo. The full attack revealed years of suppressed fury about how he'd been treated by the very people who owed their success to his resurrection of the franchise. He continued by explaining that Bond never felt real to him, that he never felt he had complete ownership over the character. He described having to deliver stupid one-liners that he loathed, always feeling phony while performing them. The admission was devastating. For 4 films in 7 years, Pierce Brosnan had been pretending to enjoy material he despised, delivered by producers he couldn't respect. The smooth charm that made him perfect for Bond was hiding a professional relationship built on mutual contempt and artistic compromise. He admitted to looking at himself in the suit and tie, wondering what he was doing there. This wasn't an actor reflecting on a difficult role. This was a man describing what felt like selling his dignity for a paycheck while hating every moment of the performance. The real venom was reserved for Broccoli and Wilson personally. He declared he could do anything he wanted now, that he wasn't beholden to them or anyone, no longer shackled by some contracted image. The word shackled revealed everything about how Brosnan viewed his time as Bond. He hadn't been the star of a prestigious franchise. He'd been a prisoner performing for masters who treated him with contempt disguised as professional courtesy. His description of their treatment of directors was particularly damning. The pomposity and rigmarole wasn't just bureaucratic inefficiency, it was systematic humiliation designed to establish dominance. Every creative decision had to be filtered through producers who valued control over quality. Brosnan continued by describing how he was trained as an actor and led to believe he had a number of performances in him, explaining how the Bond machine had wasted his talent by forcing him to repeat the same performance across 4 films. The producers had turned him into a human special effect, denying him the opportunity to actually act. The timing of this attack wasn't coincidental. Casino Royale was about to be released with Daniel Craig, and Brosnan's critique was designed to undermine confidence in the new direction while settling old scores with his former employers. He was ensuring that his replacement would start from a position of weakness. His bitterness about the dismissal process was barely concealed. He revealed that these sentiments weren't new, that they had always been the frustrating thing about the role, showing that his conflicts with Broccoli and Wilson had been ongoing throughout his entire tenure. The problems hadn't developed over time. They'd existed from the beginning. The producer's response was predictably corporate and cold. Rather than addressing his specific criticisms, they released statements thanking him for his contribution while making it clear that the franchise had moved beyond him. The dismissive tone proved Brosnan's point about their arrogance. But Brosnan wasn't finished. He began targeting their creative decisions directly, suggesting that their conservative approach had nearly the franchise before his arrival and would likely do so again. He admitted he'd gotten away with repeating the same performance, but declared he'd reached a point where he needed to start finding real performances and challenge himself. The subtext was clear. Working with Broccoli and Wilson wasn't challenging. It was creative death. Any actor who wanted to grow would need to escape their control, just as he had done. This wasn't just professional criticism, it was personal warfare. Brosnan had spent years watching these producers take credit for the success he'd created while treating him like a replaceable commodity. Now he was ensuring that their reputations would be forever linked to his accusations of artistic bankruptcy. 20 years after Pierce Brosnan's explosive departure from Bond, the franchise found itself at the center of Hollywood's most vicious corporate war. The battle between Amazon and the Broccoli family for control of 007 forced Brosnan to choose sides in a conflict that would determine the future of his legacy. The war began when Amazon acquired MGM for $8.5 billion in 2022, believing they were buying the crown jewel of action franchises. What they discovered was that Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson still controlled the creative direction, and they had no intention of surrendering power to a tech giant. The first casualties were the films themselves. No Time to Die had been Daniel Craig's farewell in 2021, but 3 years later, there was still no sign of a new Bond movie. Behind the scenes, Broccoli and Amazon were locked in a death match over who would choose the next 007. Director Edward Berger revealed that Barbara Broccoli was no longer involved, and since she was at the heart of the project, he considered it something entirely different. This confirmed that the creative force behind modern Bond was being systematically removed from power. The breaking point came in December 2024, when Broccoli made a fatal mistake. In a private conversation that was leaked to the Wall Street Journal, she called Amazon executives a profane name for their handling of the Bond franchise. The words were barely in print before Jeff Bezos was demanding her removal. Reports suggested Bezos told his lieutenants he didn't care what it cost to get rid of her, launching a billion-dollar campaign to purchase the Broccoli family's remaining control over their most valuable property. The insult that triggered Bezos wasn't just professional, it was personal. When Amazon content chief Jennifer Salke referred to Bond as content instead of a prestigious franchise, Broccoli's fury was immediate and public. She accused the streaming giant of reducing decades of cinematic history to algorithm-friendly programming. Pierce Brosnan found himself caught in the crossfire of a war between his former tormentors and the corporate machine trying to replace them. The irony wasn't lost on him. The producers he'd spent years attacking were now being destroyed by forces even more ruthless than themselves. Brosnan said diplomatically that it took great courage for them to let go, but insiders revealed he was quietly celebrating Broccoli's downfall while publicly maintaining his reputation as a gentleman. Michael G. Wilson, Broccoli's half-brother and co-producer, was also pushed out of meetings with Amazon executives, widening the divide between the old guard and new ownership. The systematic isolation was reminiscent of corporate coups in other industries, but the stakes were higher because Bond represented both artistic legacy and massive financial potential. The final surrender came in February 2025, when Broccoli and Wilson officially ceded creative control to Amazon MGM Studios for a reported $1 billion buyout. The deal allowed them to retain ownership while Amazon made all future creative decisions. Broccoli's farewell statement spoke of dedicating her life to maintaining and building upon the extraordinary legacy handed to her and Michael by their father. But the defeat was total and humiliating. For Brosnan, the corporate war represented vindication of everything he'd said about the Bond producers 20 years earlier. Their pomposity and rigmarole had finally been exposed by opponents with more money and less patience than any actor could muster. He declared that history had been passed on and expressed pride at being part of the history and legacy of Bond, positioning himself as a bridge between the old regime and whatever Amazon would create next. But his support for the transition came with a warning that everything changes and falls apart, wishing them well. The subtext was clear. He'd survived the Broccoli era, and he'd survive whatever came next. The streaming giant's victory wasn't just corporate, it was generational. The family business that had controlled Bond for over 60 years was finally broken, replaced by algorithms and analytics that valued efficiency over tradition. Amazon's first major decision was telling. They immediately began courting Brosnan for a potential return as an older Bond, exploring storylines that the previous regime had rejected. The man they'd discarded was now being recruited by their replacements. Brosnan admitted the transition came with a certain lament, but his tone suggested relief rather than sadness. The producers who had made his life miserable were gone, replaced by executives who valued his opinions and experience. The corporate war had ended exactly as Brosnan had predicted 20 years earlier, with the Bond machine consuming its own creators, while the actors who actually brought the character to life watched from the sidelines, waiting for their moment to return. At 72, Pierce Brosnan thought his days of defending his artistic choices were over. Then came Mob Land, Guy Ritchie's crime drama that was supposed to mark his triumphant return to television. Instead, it became another battleground where critics attacked his Irish accent and questioned his right to play his own heritage. The assault began immediately after the show's premiere. Ed Power wrote in The Independent that Brosnan sounded like a leprechaun who had swapped his Lucky Charms for a crock of ketamine, launching a vicious campaign against an actor whose only crime was refusing to perform Irishness the way English critics expected. The criticism revealed the same pattern that had plagued Brosnan's entire career. No matter what he did, someone would find a way to attack his legitimacy. This time, they were using his own heritage as a weapon against him. Brosnan responded defiantly when critics questioned his accent choice, explaining that he just gave it full tilt and that his own accent was very soft, while Conrad's accent was a million miles away from him. But the explanation only fueled more attacks from people who seemed determined to find fault with everything he did. The real irony was that Brosnan had worked with a dialect coach to create a specific Kerry accent for the character Conrad Harrigan. He described spending 15 minutes listening to an old Irish politician, then going back to the set to do the scene where the character was born. This was a professional process that should have been praised for its attention to detail. Instead, critics used his commitment to authenticity as evidence of failure. Helen Coffey wrote in The Independent about Brosnan's preposterous Irish brogue, calling it even more inexplicable when considering that the man actually was Irish. The subtext was clear. They expected him to perform a sanitized, internationally acceptable version of Irishness, rather than the regional specificity his character required. When he refused to compromise his artistic vision for their comfort, they weaponized his heritage against him. Brosnan admitted that every job was a challenge and came with a thump of anxiety, revealing that even at 72, he still felt the pressure of proving himself to critics who seemed determined to tear him down regardless of his choices. The anxiety wasn't just about the performance, it was about the realization that no amount of success or experience could protect him from personal attacks disguised as artistic criticism. The man who had survived Hollywood's most brutal machinery was still fighting battles against people who questioned his fundamental identity. Co-star Helen Mirren faced similar criticism for her accent, but the attacks on Brosnan were more personal and vicious. Critics seemed to take special pleasure in mocking a man they viewed as pretentious for daring to interpret his own culture through his character choices. Brosnan asked himself what he was doing on the stage and why he was there, echoing the self-doubt that critics were trying to plant. But his response revealed the warrior mentality that had sustained him through decades of industry warfare, noting that living with that stress all the time was what made it exhilarating and what made him feel alive. The Mobland controversy wasn't really about accents. It was about power and who gets to define authenticity. Critics who had never lived in Ireland felt qualified to judge an Irish actor's interpretation of Irish characters, revealing the same colonial mindset that had always plagued discussions of Celtic culture. Brosnan's defense was characteristically defiant. He said the show didn't feel like it was of this period of time, describing how he thought the show had a mythology to it. He was refusing to apologize for creating something that transcended realistic expectations. The response from Mobland's audience told a different story. The show became Paramount Plus's biggest launch in platform history, proving that viewers connected with Brosnan's performance regardless of critical attacks. Once again, he had succeeded despite the attempts to tear him down. At 72, Pierce Brosnan was still fighting the same battles he'd faced as a young actor, defending his choices against critics who seemed more interested in controversy than honest evaluation. But now he had the wisdom to know that survival was victory enough. When complimented on aging gracefully, he said he was doing his best, and that simple statement contained decades of hard-earned wisdom. In an industry that specialized in destroying people, still being here was the ultimate revenge against everyone who had tried to stop him. Anyway, that's it for this video, folks. Bye.